The alien armada drifted in the dark above the burning colony, a storm of metal blotting out the stars. On the flagship's command deck, Admiral Zervan stood before the wide observation pane, arms clasped behind his back, watching another human settlement dissolve into fire.
He didn't speak.
He rarely needed to. The enemy screamed, the world below cracked, and victory always followed like gravity obeying the laws of nature. The comms officer finally broke the silence. Surface resistance neutralized, Admiral. No survivors detected. Zervan tilted his head slightly, as though even that was too much effort. Another hour wasted. His voice was low, calm, carrying the faint irritation of a man who had won too easily for too long. We will depart once the fires finish their work. The bridge crew exchanged glances. The Admiral had grown bored years ago. Perhaps decades. When your empire spent a full century breeding soldiers, crafting war doctrines, rehearsing invasions across hundreds of worlds, victory ceased to feel like triumph. It became routine, a mathematical certainty. The crew respected him all the same. He had never lost a battle. His fleet was the Empire's pride, a century's masterpiece of planning and power. Even here, at the ragged edge of the galaxy, their war banners gleamed as though carved from light itself, a reminder to every world of the promise the Empire had made long ago. Resistance is hopeless. A junior officer approached, hesitant. High Council requests your presence, Admiral. Another target has been identified. He sighed faintly and turned. The fires below still clawed at the sky, but he no longer watched. Another raid. Another victory. Another meaningless star added to the Empire's maps. The council chamber on the flagship was circular, its walls alive with hollow screens projecting Empire propaganda. Images of marching soldiers, towering warships, cities brought to heel beneath the Empire's crest. Seated in their high-backed chairs, the counselors looked like marble statues draped in ceremonial armor. Admiral, intoned Counselor Sereth, her voice sharp as cut glass. Your success here completes the Outer Rim campaign. Our century of preparation nears its final act. Zervan inclined his head with formal boredom. The council had rehearsed that line for years. Century of preparation. They loved to repeat it, as though words alone carried weight. Yes, the Empire had spent generations training, calculating, simulating every conceivable threat. No species had lasted more than an hour against them in 100 years of conquest. The Scouts, another counselor interrupted, have discovered an isolated planet on the inner spiral. Minimal defenses. Primitive technology. They call it Earth. At this, one of the younger officers laughed outright. Do they throw spears, perhaps? Or rocks? A ripple of amusement spread through the council chamber. Even Seretha's lips curved faintly. Your orders, she said at last, are to secure this world swiftly. It will serve as a staging ground for the final expansion. We expect no meaningful resistance. Zervan studied the holographic projection of Earth rotating slowly above the table. Blue oceans. White storms curling above green continents. He had seen thousands of such worlds. This one looked no different. How long do you require? Sereth asked. The Admiral's gaze remained on the planet, but his tone was dust-dry. An hour, as always. The counselors smiled. Tradition was comforting. The Empire lived on certainty, on the promise that tomorrow would always bend before them. Orders swept through the fleet like wind across a field of steel. Vast engines awoke, crimson thrusters burning trails into the void. The armada moved as one, a predator's heartbeat quickening at the scent of prey. In the command center, officers exchanged wagers about how quickly the planet would fall. Some said 40 minutes. Others, bolder, guessed 20. None imagined failure. Zervan listened, silent as always, watching Earth swell on the forward displays. Clouds veiled its surface, like innocence pretending to be strength. No orbital defenses. No fleets rising to meet them. Just an open sky inviting conquest. He remembered the wars of his youth, long, grueling campaigns fought against enemies who had believed they stood a chance. Those wars had forged him. But now the Empire crushed worlds as easily as extinguishing a flame. Perhaps this one would offer some challenge. He doubted it. The first transmissions from Earth rose through the static. Panicked voices. Military channels breaking protocol, overlapping one another. Civilian broadcasts begging the invaders to leave. Governments demanding negotiations. Zervan heard only the same song sung by every doomed world. They always begged first. Bring us into low orbit, he ordered. The flagship descended with its escort, vast shadows crawling across the upper atmosphere. Below, the planet stirred like an anthill under boiling water, cities flickering with lights, air defense networks belatedly powering online. Too little. Too late. Open a channel, the Admiral said. The holoscreen flared to life. A human official, face pale and tight with fear, demanded to speak with the invaders. Zervan regarded him as one might study an insect learning to raise its voice. This planet, the human said, is under sovereign. You will surrender, Zervan interrupted softly. His voice carried across the distance like falling ash. There will be no negotiations. Only obedience or silence. Behind him, bridge officers smirked. The official sputtered about treaties, rights, civilizations. It was almost endearing, like a child reciting laws to a storm. The channel cut. Deploy the landing craft, Zervan ordered. Vast doors yawned open along the fleet's underbellies. Troop carriers launched in formation, dark meteors streaking toward the atmosphere. Shockwaves rolled across the cloud tops as hundreds descended toward the surface. The Admiral watched them fall, unreadable. Another hour. Another victory. He almost wished the planet would surprise him. But Earth's skies remained still, waiting. The first landing waves vanished into the clouds. Ground telemetry confirmed touchdown across major urban centers. Resistance minimal. Cities frozen beneath the invaders' shadow. 1 hour, he told himself. Perhaps less. The bridge was quiet except for the hum of instruments, the muted voices of officers relaying standard assault protocols. The routine felt almost ceremonial by now. Ships descend, resistance folds, banners rise. Zervan clasped his hands behind his back and stared at the blue curve of Earth below. The landing zones crackled with reports of surrendering militias, civilians fleeing through streets. Everything unfolding as expected. And yet he frowned faintly. Something in the silence felt heavier than usual. The planet seemed to be waiting, as though holding its breath. He dismissed the thought. The Empire had never been wrong. Far below, beyond the cloud cover, in cities and oceans and mountains unseen by alien eyes, Earth's machines were awakening, silent and patient as the grave. The hour had begun. The first sign came as a flicker. Barely noticeable at first, a tremor across the alien fleet's long-range scanners, like static crawling along the edge of vision. On the flagship's bridge, officers muttered about atmospheric interference, solar winds, anything except the possibility that something was wrong. Zervan stood in his usual silence, watching the descent report scroll across the holoscreens. Landing craft confirmed in multiple human cities, soldiers deploying as planned, resistance crumbling with predictable speed. The numbers told the same story they always told: victory before lunch. But then the static deepened. Whole communication channels went dark, not with noise, but with the kind of smooth, deliberate silence that left no trace of origin. Alien technicians tried to reboot systems, reroute signals, but the void swallowed their efforts one by one. The fleet's private networks flickered, died, returned briefly, then fell silent again. The Admiral turned slightly toward his communications officer. Report. The officer hesitated. Interference, unknown source. We're losing fleet cohesion. Orders aren't reaching the ground. Then shout louder, Zervan said. It was the closest he came to a rebuke. Across the bridge, a navigation officer frowned at his instruments. Admiral, orbital mapping is shifting. Defensive satellites we tagged earlier, gone. Destroyed? No. They moved. Zervan's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed. Weapons didn't move themselves. Then the first railgun strike ripped through the upper atmosphere. It came from the surface, from a point the fleet had mapped as civilian infrastructure, an empty skyscraper in what the aliens thought was a financial district. The round traveled at hypersonic speed, a tungsten spike guided by magnetic rails buried deep inside the building's hollowed core. It hit the nearest landing craft squarely in its belly, vaporizing it before the crew even registered impact. Reports flooded the bridge. More railguns emerging from abandoned city blocks, from ocean platforms disguised as weather stations, from mountain ridges hollowed into fortresses. Every shot precise. Every shot planned. Zervan gave no visible reaction, but something shifted in his stance, a subtle tightening of shoulders, the first crack in the mask of eternal victory. On Earth's surface, alien troops tried to regroup, but streets they had mapped as empty now birthed automated drones from sewer grates, from shipping containers, from rivers where nothing but barges had floated hours earlier. The drones moved without visible coordination, silent swarms of steel insects armed with rail cannons and pulse charges, carving through landing zones with mathematical efficiency. A voice cut through the chaos on every alien channel, clear and calm, carrying no trace of fear. Human.
Male.
Older. You should have stayed in orbit. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even angry. It was delivered like advice, the way a parent might warn a child about playing near fire. Zervan heard it through the bridge speakers and felt, not fear, not yet, but the faint prickle of something unfamiliar crawling under his skin. Alien officers scrambled for explanations. Guerrilla tactics, they said. Desperation measures. Yet none could deny the precision, the coordination, the way human forces seemed less like a panic defense and more like a trap snapping shut. Then the skies themselves changed. From Earth's dark side, where night swallowed oceans whole, something enormous rose into orbit. Satellites the size of towers, their hulls blacker than space itself. They had been invisible to alien scans until now, heat signatures masked, power cores cold as rock. But they woke suddenly, unfolding panels like wings, weapon ports glowing faintly along their edges. The first alien cruiser vanished under a lance of light, so bright it left afterimages burning in the bridge crew's eyes. No explosion, just erasure, metal and fire peeling apart in silence before its fragments even touched the ground. Zervan leaned forward slightly. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Identify those weapons. No one answered. Their instruments had no category for what they were seeing. Minute by minute, the battle inverted. Alien fleets built across a century began dying in seconds. On the ground, armored columns of alien soldiers fell back toward extraction points, but the points no longer existed. Dropships exploded before they touched down. Plasma artillery meant to cow civilian populations instead found themselves bombarded by missile salvos launched from cargo freighters that had looked, an hour earlier, like nothing but rusting relics of trade. The calm human voice returned, this time across visual channels. A man in a dark uniform, middle-aged, eyes cold as glacier water. No insignia. No name. This was never defense, he said softly. It was invitation. The bridge crew froze. Even the air felt thinner. Zervan studied the man's face, looking for rage, for triumph, for anything he understood. He found nothing. Only a quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any weapon. The man continued, leave orbit immediately, or be dismantled. The message ended. No demand for surrender. No negotiation. Just a deadline spoken without heat, as though the outcome had already been decided. Zervan ordered the fleet to regroup, but commands lagged, disrupted by interference threading through their systems like veins of ice. One by one, alien ships reported propulsion failures, targeting blindness, power fluctuations that made no tactical sense. It felt less like sabotage and more like their machines had begun obeying someone else. On screen, alien landing forces tried to establish defensive perimeters, only to be driven into kill zones revealed by sudden drone swarms and precision airstrikes launched from hidden wings buried beneath riverbeds. Each minute bled the fleet's confidence thinner. 5 minutes into the invasion, Half the ground forces had gone silent. Entire platoons are raced beneath collapsing highways rigged with seismic charges years in advance. Civilian buildings split open to reveal missile platforms that launched, fired, then sank back into hiding before alien sensors could trace trajectories. The sixth minute arrived like a closing hand. The flagship shuddered violently as its shields failed without warning, power grids crashing under forces no one aboard understood. Alien gunners tried to return fire, but weapons turned to molten slag under pinpoint rail strikes from orbiting satellites that hadn't existed on any map 6 minutes ago. On the bridge, lights failed, flickered back, failed again. Smoke hissed from consoles. Officers shouted fragmented reports over alarms that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Through it all, Zervan stood motionless, watching the earth below, its cities flickering with hidden teeth, its skies alive with fire. He realized the truth not with rage, but with the cold clarity of a man glimpsing his own obituary. The century of conquest had ended here, not with resistance, but with revelation. Earth had never been prey. The fleet that had burned 100 worlds was dying in minutes, and the silence between each explosion felt less like chaos and more like judgment. When the final rail shot pierced the flagship's engines, sending the vessel lurching into retreat trajectory, Zervan understood why the human voice had sounded so calm. They had wanted him to come, and now they were done pretending to be weak. The Imperial Council convened in the capital's great chamber, a vaulted hall carved from obsidian and tradition. Light from the system's twin suns streamed through crystal arches, illuminating banners of victories stretching back 10,000 years. For centuries, this place had echoed with speeches of conquest, of empires falling before their fleets. Today it echoed with something new, fear thinly disguised as fury. Zervan stood at the center, still carrying the silence of defeat like a shadow draped across his shoulders. His uniform bore no visible damage, yet he seemed aged by decades rather than hours. He waited as counselors hurled accusations at one another, voices sharp with panic. "They used weapons beyond our science," one shouted, his jeweled armor trembling with each syllable. "Impossible weapons." "Impossible," snarled another. "Or did we grow complacent while primitives prepared in secret?" Emperor Kael'th rose from his throne, silencing them with a glance. Age had bent his frame, but not his presence. He ruled by sheer gravity of will. "Admiral Zervan," he said slowly, "explain how a century of military supremacy crumbled in less than 10 minutes. Zervan met the Emperor's gaze. "Because they were never defending themselves," he said, voice low but steady. "They were luring us." The words rippled through the chamber. Some scoffed, unwilling to accept it. Others stared at him with dawning comprehension. "They hid their strength," he continued. "Let us believe they were fragile, divided, unprepared. Every city, every so-called civilian structure, traps waiting for us to walk into them." Counselor Sereth leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Are you suggesting this? Earth anticipated the Empire's interest? That they built their entire planet as bait?" Zervan hesitated. He remembered the human voice on their channels, calm, almost pitying. "You should have stayed in orbit." He remembered precision strikes landing with surgical indifference, the kind that spoke not of desperation, but of confidence earned through centuries of preparation. "Yes," he said finally. "I believe they have studied us far longer than we have studied them." The chamber erupted again, outrage clashing with terror. Some demanded immediate retaliation, others called for diplomacy, a few for retreat. The Empire had not faced an equal foe in living memory. They lacked even the vocabulary for defeat. Amid the chaos, Zervan stood unmoving. Inside, fragments of memory replayed, without mercy. Soldiers erased mid-march, entire battalions swallowed by collapsing streets, capital ships silenced by weapons their sensors couldn't even name. And always that human voice, measured and unafraid, as if speaking from a position of absolute control. Emperor Kael'th raised a hand. "Order must prevail," he said. His voice carried the weight of law itself. "We will not descend into panic like rabble. We will analyze, understand, and answer this insult with proportionate force. Force, Zervan said sharply before protocol could silence him. You misunderstand, Majesty. Force is what they expect. It's what they've already prepared to break. The counselors stared. No one interrupted an emperor. Yet Kael'th regarded the admiral with something like curiosity. Then what do you propose?
Caution, Zervan said.
Observation before escalation. We must know what they are before we decide what to do. Laughter broke from the council's militant faction. Admiral Thalek, rival and opportunist, rose from his seat. Caution? Against a single planet of upstart savages? You shame your uniform, Zervan. I will lead the counterstrike myself and grind this earth to dust before the next rotation. Zervan turned toward him slowly. The same way I did? Thalek's confidence flickered, but pride held his tongue still. They dismantled an entire invasion fleet in minutes, Zervan said to the room. Not through overwhelming numbers, but through precision. They knew us, our tactics, our arrogance, our history. Do you not wonder how? A scholar counselor, pale and trembling, spoke for the first time. We've intercepted fragments of their broadcasts. They carry images of wars fought on their own soil. Centuries of it. Endless conflict, slaughter beyond even our most violent eras. He swallowed hard. They have turned war into an art form. Hollow screens lit suddenly along the chamber walls, showing stolen glimpses of human history. Trenches choked with gas, skies blackened by bombers, cities vaporized in nuclear fire. Not simulations. Records. Real wars fought with real extinction at stake. Counselors watched in silence as footage rolled on. Dresden burning, mushroom clouds blooming over deserts, soldiers in muddy helmets charging machine guns under storm-gray skies. They are forged from this, the scholar whispered. While our empire bathed in centuries of victory, they learned survival in ways we cannot imagine. Even the Emperor's face tightened as images shifted to orbital weapons tests, to rockets carrying warheads capable of splitting worlds. Humanity's timeline seemed written in fire. Zervan studied his fellow counselors, seeing bravado draining from faces that had only known triumph. Now imagine, he said softly, what such a species might build when given a century without war on its own soil. When all its science turns outward. Silence fell heavy as armor. But Thalek would not yield. Old battles, he snapped, gesturing at the flickering images. Artifacts of a violent past. They have spirit, yes, but spirit does not stop orbital bombardment. Give me command, and I will. The chamber lights died. 3 heartbeats, only darkness and startled breathing filled the room. Then emergency luminescence bathed the chamber in blood-red glow. A voice spoke through the council's private channels, the same voice that had warned the fleet above Earth.
Calm. Male.
Unshaken. We asked you to leave. Counselors froze, recognizing the language translated directly into their neural implants. Security officers scanned frantically for the intrusion source, finding nothing. Your fleet was warned. The voice continued evenly. This is your second warning. Do not earn a third. The connection severed. Systems returned to normal as though nothing had happened. The council chamber stood in stunned silence. For the first time in its long history, the Empire had been interrupted inside its own heart. Zervan exhaled slowly. They are already here, he said. Emperor Kael'th's hands curled over his throne's arms. The council saw it then, the first shadow of doubt touching a man once thought carved from certainty itself. Leave us, he ordered the assembly, voice lower than before. All of you. I will deliberate. One by one, counselors filed out, their footsteps ringing against stone older than most civilizations. Some whispered of retaliation, others of diplomacy, a few of surrender. Zervan lingered last, his eyes lifting toward the vast windows where the twin suns bled light across the sky. He had spent a lifetime believing in the Empire's eternity. Now, watching those suns burn, he wondered how much longer they had before the darkness came for them too. The human fleets arrived without spectacle, tearing through space as though the void itself bent to their passage. No warnings, No parades of power. One moment the skies above the imperial capital were clear, the next they were filled with angular silhouettes sliding from wormholes like predators stepping through tall grass. Admiral Zervan watched from the command spire, his jaw tight but his eyes steady. Around him, the capital defense network erupted with alarms, officers shouting over one another as weapons platforms powered up across the system. The Empire had gathered its surviving fleets here, ringed the capital with fortresses, mobilized every warship not crippled above Earth. Yet as the humans advanced in perfect silence, a part of Zervan already knew. Numbers wouldn't matter. Emperor Kael'th entered the command spire, flanked by guards in ceremonial armor. He studied the holographic battlefield spreading across the air, hundreds of alien ships forming defensive walls, energy shields overlapping, the proud choreography of a civilization that believed itself eternal. "Admiral," the Emperor said, his voice carved from iron, "this is the moment history will remember. Break them, and the Empire stands unchallenged for another 1,000 years." Zervan did not answer immediately. He watched the human ships drift closer, unhurried, as though the entire war balanced on their timetable alone. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something heavier than fear. "Majesty," he said, "we are not witnessing courage. We are witnessing certainty. They have come because they already know the outcome." The Emperor turned sharply, but before he could reply, the first human strike fell. It was not the chaos of ordinary war. No blazing broadsides, no clashing formations. Instead, surgical beams of light cut through space like scalpels through flesh. Entire defense platforms fell silent before their crews understood they were under attack. Alien cruisers died in perfect symmetry, power cores imploding one after another as if marked years in advance. Alien commanders shouted for counteroffensives, unleashing swarms of fighters, planetary railguns, missile storms across the void. Human ships slid between them with machine precision, shields blooming only where needed, weapons firing with mathematical restraint. It felt less like battle and more like judgment rendered from a higher plane. The Emperor gripped the command rail, fury flashing in his eyes. "Send everything. Every ship, every drone. I want the skies drowned in fire." Vast formations obeyed, the Empire emptying its veins into the storm. Yet the humans moved through it like hunters among insects. Wormholes bloomed without warning, disgorging new fleets behind Imperial lines, severing escape corridors before they even formed. Zervan stood rigid, forcing himself to watch as centuries of dominance unraveled in minutes. He had devoted his life to the Empire's perfection, believed in its invincibility as others believed in sunrise. Now he saw war stripped of pageantry, stripped of glory, reduced to the cold geometry of extinction, and he realized humanity had mastered it beyond anything the Empire had ever imagined. A transmission pierced the command spire. The same human voice that had haunted the council chamber spoke again, calm as winter rain. "This is not conquest," it said. "It is conclusion. Withdraw all forces. Surrender your war councils. No further warnings will follow." Emperor Kael'th snarled at the voice as though hatred could bridge the void. "This is Imperial soil. I will burn before I kneel to outworld savages." The human reply was not anger. Only silence, followed by weapons fire carving through the last orbital fortresses like parchment. Alien ships died burning, spiraling into the capital's upper atmosphere, raining fire across the sky. Cities trembled as defense grids collapsed, power networks failing one by one. The command spire shuddered as shockwaves rolled through the crust itself. At last the Emperor turned on Zervan, rage fighting the first hints of despair. "You would have me yield?"
To them.
Zervan met his eyes. "Yield or vanish. There will be nothing left to rule if this continues." Outside the windows, the Imperial flagship exploded in a blossom of white fire, debris scattering across the heavens like dying stars. The human fleets held position, waiting, weapons cold now, their silence heavier than any threat. For the first time in his reign, Emperor Kael'th looked old. His empire lay broken beyond repair, fleets shattered, colonies cut off, pride bleeding into ash. Yet surrender tasted like poison in his mouth. "They will want my throne," he said bitterly. "No," Zervan answered, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "They will want order. An end to this before it spreads further. Give them that, Majesty, while you still can." When the surrender was transmitted, the human reply came not with triumph, but with chilling restraint. "Govern your worlds," the voice said. "Dismantle your weapons. Teach your people peace, or we will teach it for you." The message ended. No occupation fleets descended. No banners were raised. The humans left as suddenly as they had come, vanishing into wormholes that sealed behind them like closing wounds. Emperor Kael'th sank into his command throne, shoulders heavy, crown tilted, as though the metal itself had grown too heavy to bear. Around him, officers moved in silence, faces pale with the knowledge that history had ended one way and begun another. Zervan alone remained standing, eyes fixed on the empty sky where the human fleets had vanished. In their absence, the Empire felt smaller, as though the galaxy itself had shifted its center of gravity elsewhere. He knew then that survival carried its own weight. The Empire would live, yes, but under the shadow of a species that had defeated them without hatred, without even the satisfaction of victory. Humanity had shown power beyond conquest, the kind that rewrote destinies with the finality of law. As fires burned along the capital's horizon, Zervan wondered what kind of rulers they would become now that were no longer threatened to consume them. Because something told him this had never been about the Empire at all. This had been humanity's awakening, and the galaxy had just witnessed the first 6 minutes of its reign.